In the competitive, physical, and let's face it, testosterone-fueled world of professional wrestling, the occasional backstage fight between performers is to be expected. These can range from relatively harmless pull-aparts to full-on bloodbaths, but it's always intriguing when the supposedly fake industry turns very real behind the curtain. Often these fights will become infamous due to the content of the scrap itself, the events leading up to it, or the consequences doled out once the dust and baby powder has settled. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are the 10 most infamous backstage pro wrestling fights. Join us.
But before we start, today's video is sponsored by NordVPN. We at Cultaholic truly believe that Nord is the best service of its kind. Firstly, it's super easy to use. Connect with one click or enable auto-connect for zero-click protection. There are over 5,300 servers in 60 different countries, which is a hell of a lot. It has amazing speed, confirmed by the speed tests. NordVPN is the fastest service out there, and it's on every major platform. So here's how I use Nord. Obviously, I live in the United Kingdom, but with NordVPN, I can set myself to be anywhere in the world virtually and access content from those regions. So this means, if I fancied it, I could set myself to be somewhere in the world virtually and sign up for a certain sports entertainment network for a fraction of the price. Or if I happen to live in the United States, I could sign up for that sports entertainment network, even though it doesn't properly exist as it did in the United States before. Oh, and it works on lots of other on-demand services too. Nord costs the equivalent of a cup of fancy coffee every month, a small price to pay for complete peace of mind when it comes to cybersecurity and access to a whole range of entertaining content. Also, there's even a 30-day money-back guarantee, so if Nord isn't for you, you can get your money back, no bother at all. Grab your exclusive NordVPN deal by going to nordvpn.com/Cultaholic, links in the description below, to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan, plus an additional 4 months for free. And remember, it's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. Thanks for watching, enjoy the video.
Number 10. Scott Steiner vs. Diamond Dallas Page. Right at the very top of the long list of people I do not want to pee off sits the name Scott Steiner. Even in his advanced age and following several health scares, I still reckon the big bad booty daddy would be able to shove my head up my backside quicker than you can say he's fat. Back in 2000, Steiner had an utterly fearsome reputation due to his legitimate amateur wrestling background combined with his propensity to fly off the handle at the drop of a chainmail hat. Big Papa Pump took issue with head Nitro girl Kimberly Page ratting out Tammy Sunny Sitch to WCW management after she found an illicit substance backstage, especially after Sitch passed a subsequent drug test. Scotty chased Kimberly out of the building and out of WCW, it would turn out, which unsurprisingly irked her then-husband Diamond Dallas Page. DDP attempted to stand up for his wife, bless him, but ended up on the ground after Steiner absolutely wiped the floor with him backstage at a TV taping, with the genetic freak becoming so enraged that he at one point tried to remove Dallas's eyeball. Number 9. Chris Jericho vs. Goldberg. The bad blood between Chris Jericho and Goldberg dates back to 1998, when Y2J was desperately trying to work some sort of program with the ultra-hot Smashing Machine. Goldie had other ideas and poured cold water all over Jericho's plans, even though they ended with the former Cruiserweight champion doing a decisive JOB to the man. Fast forward 5 years later, and both were working in WWE as members of the Raw roster. Right at the start of his WWE run, Goldberg was supposedly caught mouthing off about Jericho's ring work, resulting in a backstage confrontation. Jericho told his real-life adversary that they weren't in WCW anymore and that things had changed. While they were arguing, Goldberg grabbed Jericho by the throat, causing the Ayatollah of Rock and Roller to push him away. The former NFL lineman then charged and attempted a tackle, but Jericho caught him in a front facelock, immobilizing him until other wrestlers broke them up. Jericho later admitted to being terrified about what might happen to him if the far bigger Goldberg got free, but it was a major moral victory for the much smaller man. Thankfully, the two called a truce and worked together without incident. Number 8. Rick Rude versus the Ultimate Warrior. The Ultimate Warrior got over big by running through the competition in record time, as he was portrayed as one of the most indestructible forces in the business. Fantasy had reality beat, of course, because in real life, Jim Hellwig wasn't exactly known as a tough guy. At least not in the way that noted mustachioed arm wrestling expert and bar fight veteran Rick Rude was. Ravishing Rick and the Warrior worked extensively together during their collective WWE primes, and while they made magic in the ring, didn't always see eye to eye in the locker room. Rude's main issue was that Warrior would work, in his mind, unnecessarily stiff, and after one particularly bruising bout, warned Big Jim that he needed to lighten up. Warrior disagreed, telling Rude that he didn't need to because he's the Warrior, which went down about as well as you would expect. Rude did what many of his colleagues would have loved to have done and decked the neon-drenched musclehead with a single punch before, I'm assuming, getting into his sports car with a beautiful lady and driving off into the sunset while smoking a cigarette. Number 7. Awesome Kong versus Bubba the Love Sponge. I'm fairly confident Bubba the Love Sponge wasn't a name that you expected to see here, was it? Ah yes, Bubba the Love Sponge, the man most famous for taping his best friend Hulk Hogan running wild on his own wife. Brother! The Florida DJ had begun working for TNA in early 2010 as a backstage interviewer. Just a couple of weeks into his tenure, the so-called Love Sponge happened to find himself in the locker room with a less than happy Awesome Kong. The former Knockouts champion had a bone to pick with Bubba over some very distasteful comments he had made in relation to the recent devastating earthquake in Haiti. Kong had just participated in a fundraiser as part of the earthquake relief effort, and feeling very tired and emotional, couldn't sit idly by and do nothing, so she clattered him. TNA sent both of them home, with Bubba returning as the band's personal backstage interviewer a couple of months later, only to be let go soon after getting into another confrontation with Kong, this time only verbal, on the Cowhead show. TNA wanted them to do an angle based on their beef, but Kong actually has a brain and turned it down. Number 6. Paul Orndorff versus Vader. Big Van Vader had a reputation for being a bit of a bully back in the day, not only with regards to the unfortunate schmucks he would clobber in the ring, but also sometimes to those working backstage. Paul Orndorff was not just a wrestler, but also an agent when he encountered a belligerent mastodon in the back during a WCW TV taping in the mid-90s. The whole thing came about initially due to a misunderstanding. Orndorff believed that Vader had shown up late, unaware that the former WCW heavyweight champion had actually been asked to do a pre-planned photo shoot by Eric Bischoff. Mr. Wonderful needed Vader to film an interview later in the evening, and when Vader tried to put it off, Orndorff got on his face and words were exchanged, resulting in Vader slapping him away. Vader was worried he might have hurt the veteran after knocking him off his feet, but he needn't have worried because Orndorff proceeded to beat Vader up something fierce, including repeatedly kicking him in the face, all while wearing flip-flops. That was the end of Vader in WCW, as he left the promotion rather than pay a large fine or sit out a suspension due to his part in the fight. Number 5. Ric Flair versus Eric Bischoff. Really, is it any surprise that tempers flared and fists were thrown in WCW with a confrontational figure like Eric Bischoff at the helm? Eazy-E famously challenged Vince McMahon to come and fight him live on a WCW pay-per-view, probably fully aware that it had no chance of actually happening and could be temperamental with even top talent. For example, the legendary Ric Flair, who felt hugely disrespected by Bischoff and actually got embroiled in a lawsuit with him after the Nature Boy Mr. Nitro taping in 1998. Tensions were apparently still simmering when Eric showed up as WWE Raw general manager 4 years later, because it didn't take Slick Rick, flanked by Arn Anderson, long to attack his old boss backstage. According to Bischoff, Flair's flurry caught him off guard since 1. He was sitting in an office on the telephone, and 2. He believed that the two had a cordial relationship at the time. A confused Bischoff refused to retaliate, though none of Flair's punches truly connected before road agent Sergeant Slaughter intervened. Bischoff was more perplexed than anything, but thankfully the two were able to patch things up and work together, even becoming friends after Rick got it out of his system. Number 4. Eddie Guerrero and Kurt Angle. Eddie Guerrero and Kurt Angle worked extensively with each other in 2004, clashing at WrestleMania, SummerSlam, on numerous episodes of SmackDown, and at non-televised live events throughout the year. They made magic every time they locked horns, but all was not well between Latino Heat and the Olympic hero in the dressing room. Guerrero was upset, believing that Angle was working too stiff with him in their matches, while Kurt believed that he had been carrying Eddie in the ring as Guerrero was hurt at the time and struggling physically. Things came to a head backstage at a SmackDown taping after a miscommunication during an angle that also featured Big Show and Luther Reigns. The two began yelling at each other and Angle pushed Guerrero, prompting Eddie to attempt a double leg takedown, keyword being attempt. Considering Kurt is, an Olympic gold medal amateur wrestler, this was a mistake. He easily grabbed Guerrero in a front facelock and neutralized him until they were broken up by the world's largest athlete. They were further held apart by the rest of the Blue Crew, calmed down, and later buried the hatchet. Number 3, Bret Hart vs. Shawn Michaels. And now time for class working yourself into a shoot 101 with Professors Michaels and Hart. Shawn and Bret had developed a professional rivalry built on the desire to be the best, most heavily pushed, and highest paid performer during WWE's mid-90s New Generation era, but the lines became blurred when they made a mutual decision to incorporate more realism into their long-running on-screen feud. After the Heartbreak Kid made reference to Hart enjoying some sunny days, implying Bret was having an extramarital affair with the WWE diva, the Hitman let it be known that things might turn legitimately physical with Michaels. Backstage at a Raw taping in June of 1997, Bret stormed HBK's locker room and the two began arguing before throwing down. Hart got the better of the exchange, pummeling Shawn with punches and ripping out a clump of the boy toy's hair before it was broken up by Jerry Briscoe, Pat Patterson, and some of the wrestlers. Both men left the taping without appearing on the show, with Shawn later threatening to sue if he wasn't released from his contract, citing an unsafe work environment. Cooler heads ultimately prevailed and things went smoothly until, Number 2, the Dynamite Kid vs. Jacques Rougeau. The Dynamite Kid may not have been the biggest man in the WWE locker room, but Tom Billington felt as though he was 10 feet tall and untouchable. A notorious ribber like his cousin Davey Boy Smith, who could often be cruel, Dynamite had a reputation as a hard man and few challenged him even after being on the receiving end of his mean-spirited pranks. The Rougeau brothers came backstage one time to find their clothes cut up and immediately suspected the British Bulldogs were to blame. The French Canadians had been victims one too many times, and this was the straw that broke the camel's back, or moose's back, I guess. I don't know, whatever animal they have there in Montreal. In reality, Kurt Mr. Perfect Hennig was the true culprit, but they blamed the wrong party and Dynamite went off on them and left Jacques Rougeau beaten and humiliated. A few weeks later, Jacques got his revenge by sucker-punching Kid with a roll of coins around the corner from catering, knocking out several of Billington's teeth. Weeks after that, Vince McMahon pulled them all in a meeting and hashed things out, with Jacques agreeing to pay for Tom's new teeth. Number 1, CM Punk and Ace Steel versus The Elite. And so we come to the most recent backstage brawl, one which has very quickly become infamous. A little over a year after making his triumphant return to professional wrestling, CM Punk caused controversy with some very pointed comments during the post-All Out 2022 media scrum. In particular, the straight-edge superstar talked openly about his personal issues with Colt Cabana and Hangman Adam Page, while also taking shots at some of the company's EVPs, clearly in reference to Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks. When Punk got back to his locker room, he was quickly approached by the Elite members, who were apparently accompanied by AEW's Chief Legal Officer, Maker Perek, and Talent Relations Head, Christopher Daniels. Things suddenly escalated, with reports suggesting the newly crowned AEW champion threw the first punch. In the melee, backstage producer and longtime Punk confidant Ace Steel allegedly bit Omega, and Nick Jackson took a chair to the eye. Suspensions were doled out and legal action threatened following the roster-dividing showdown, with some suggesting the Second City Saint may not be welcomed back. Hey Punk, if you want to fight people for real, why don't you try UFC, tough guy? Oh, wait.